veganism and critiques of consumerism and of what we would now call a kind of lifestylist politics and sort of subcultural politics that claimed radical politics very seriously, but was not really interested in doing mass politics. Certainly not interested in anything as foolish as elections, for example, or things like the labor movement. And that I went down that road for a long time until I sort of continued reading and got involved in the labor movement when I was in college through United Students Against Sweatshops, which is a student labor group, the most important student labor group in the country. And that took me down a different path and got me to realize some of the shortcomings of this kind of anarchist, ultra-left style politics that had brought me to critiques of capitalism when I was a teenager. I'm grateful for those experiences in some ways. I wish they hadn't happened in other ways, but overall, I'm glad that young people get to skip that step. I would suggest skipping that step. I learned a lot about politics through those years, but I also picked up some sort of bad political habits, and some of those political habits are still present with us. There's still a kind of anarchisty lifestyle, I should say, lifestylist anarchisty flavor of a lot of what we do. A suspicion of electoral politics, a emphasis on personal choices that is not the way to change the world. But as I said, I'm glad that there's now left-wing media outlets like Jacobin, where I work, and there is the Democratic Socialists of America as the most important socialist organization in the United States. They're on a much better path than the one that was dominated by with those kind of ultra-left currents in the 90s and the 2000s when I got politicized.
Yeah, and of course you mentioned the involvement of Bernie Sanders and everything with kind of left-wing politics can be divided into a pre-Bernie period and kind of a post-Bernie period, of course, with 2016. And how did you, if you were, how did you get involved with Bernie in 2016? When do you kind of get a sense that he would be a different type of candidate?
It's a good question. My story is that by 2016 or 2015 when Bernie first ran, I had been a radical for over a decade, radical of some sort for over a decade at that point. And I was working for Jacobin, or had worked for Jacobin at that point. I was an editor. I think in 2015, 2016, I was working as an editor in These Times magazine after having worked at Jacobin for a little while. So I was a socialist magazine editor, but I did not believe that the politics that I claimed could really have mass purchase in America. I was like, yeah, this is the right thing to do, but I don't think I bought the line, right, that we hear about the United States, which is that it's uniquely allergic to anything that smacks of socialism and class politics. And so I was contented to toil in obscurity and never have my politics really catch on at a national level. I was just like, yep, that's the life I've chosen for myself. It's a noble one, but it will be an obscure one that never really amounts to much. And lo and behold, Bernie Sanders proved to me that was wrong, that there actually was a hunger out there for that kind of politics. And his first campaign, I just learned that there was a mass audience for this stuff. I never really believed that Sanders could win the presidency. But then in 2020, there were many moments where I actually found myself thinking, maybe he actually is going to pull this thing out. Maybe, I think at one point after Pete Buttigieg was declared the winner of Iowa, but Bernie got more votes. And after Nevada, I remember thinking to myself, well, Bernie has won the most votes in all of these primaries so far, primaries and caucuses. Maybe he's going to win everything. Maybe he's going to win all. What if he wins all the primaries and caucuses, which is such an absurd thing to consider in hindsight. But that was the kind of, the fervor pitch at which the fever pitch at which we were operating at that point. In hindsight, it was always the most likely outcome that Bernie was going to lose, given what he was up against, and given that this campaign was such a the two campaigns were such a, it was like a shortcut seemed to present itself. It was like a cheat code all of a sudden presented itself in our politics, because anybody on the left, before 2015 would have said like, well, the way that we build our politics is sort of slowly through, building up a base, and maybe if we're going to engage in the electoral arena, we win some city council races here, and maybe we work our way up. There's a sort of steady progression. The graph is a sort of slow and steady rise. But instead, Bernie just out and runs for president, and we all of a sudden think that, wow, maybe we were going to go from socialism being almost completely dead as an ideology in 2015 to having a socialist become the most powerful person in the entire planet in 2020. And it sounds absurd to say now, but that's what it felt at the time. And so, yeah, as I said, it was always most likely that he was going to lose, but I'm very grateful that he kind of jump-started the socialist movement in the United States, that he showed the importance of vying for positions like the presidency and elected office generally. He helped cohere the newly reborn socialist movement through the Democratic Socialists of America. He inspired people like AOC and Cori Bush and others to run for office, and now they're in office and are advancing left demands. So I'm very extremely great. We all sure our politics would look the way that they do today if it weren't for him running for president.
Yeah, and I really have kind of noticed what you referenced about this sense of a lot of people just getting into and really being inspired by Bernie Sanders and seeing his campaign in 2016, getting very like this kind of me what I had. I first found out really about Bernie Sanders after the kind of 2016 campaign. I got very excited for the 2020 campaign and felt very confident, not really understanding, being relatively new to politics and relatively new to kind of leftism ideology, that it was such a far and such a long road ahead that so many of you guys had worked to build up. So I do want to ask a little bit about kind of the Bernie 2020 campaign, and getting in a little bit more specifically. What would you say, in terms of strategy, were the differences and kind of similarities from the 2016 and 2020 Bernie Sanders campaigns? Because from what I understand, they were quite different. And what do you think some of those more effective strategy changes were in 2020?
Well, I think Bernie, like me, had a different sense of the actual possibility of him winning in 2020. Mm-hmm. I think that in 2016 he maybe came to realize that he was running more than a protest campaign, and that he might actually have had a shot late in the campaign. But certainly, 2020 from the get-go was a campaign that was run by somebody or run for somebody who was actually serious about winning the presidency of the United States from the jump. There are pet theories that people like to advance. Everybody's got their theories about 20. People who say, for example, that Bernie lost in 2020 because he adopted more of the rhetoric of the kind of social justice left. He was, I don't know, more willing. I mean, for some people, it's like, well, he talked about racism, and that was what did him in, which is a theory that I find absurd. I mean, it's more borne out on the people who say that they're irrational and frankly reactionary antipathy towards much of the existing left, and often bizarre and racist approaches to things like the movement to defund the police. But so I don't. That's not why I think he lost. Certainly, anybody who believes that is absurd. But I mean, certainly what we saw this time around was it was the Democratic field, for one thing, was different. I mean, in 2016, he was up against a uniquely loathed candidate, Hillary Clinton, and I don't think anybody really understood how loathed she was until we actually saw what she actually lost an election against Trump. This time around, there was a spread out Democratic field, and then of course the consolidation of the Democratic Party around Joe Biden is something that is unprecedented, but nobody should be surprised by that. Nobody should be surprised that Amy Klobuchar, Pete Buttigieg, Joe Biden. What's the real substantive difference between any of them? I mean, they're all part of the same project within the Democratic Party, so we shouldn't be surprised when they decide to, consolidate their forces around Joe Biden. Pete Buttigieg knows that he's got how many 10 other electoral cycles that he can run for president, and so he can wait. He's not going anywhere. I guess one thing that is different that is worth mentioning is that I remember before Bernie decided to run for president in 2016, there were calls for Elizabeth Warren to run for president. And I think there's some reporting that suggests that Bernie himself thought that Elizabeth Warren should run for president in 2016, but she didn't decide to do that, and she didn't go up against Hillary Clinton, which I think speaks to her orientation towards the party. She didn't want to go up against a key member of that party's leadership, despite Hillary Clinton's record of terribleness. But in 2020, she, as in Elizabeth Warren, did decide to run, I think because Bernie showed that there was a lane for someone to run on the left or from a progressive point of view. I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist and say that she decided to do that in order to undercut Bernie Sanders, but certainly that was the effect of her running. I mean, if she had if she had not run, if she had dropped out sooner, if she had consolidated, if she had endorsed Bernie when it was clear that she had really no hope going forward, if she, all of these things, if they had changed, the electoral outcome could have changed. And I think in the future, we're going to see more people. We already see more people who are taking the kind of Elizabeth Warren route, which is, they see that there is this kind of bold left-wing politics that's being advanced by Bernie Sanders and people who support him, that is often being done under the banner of democratic socialism. They don't want to use that scary word, but they want to run on progressive politics, and they often will do so in ways that undercut genuine left-wing politics, and their kind of weak tea version of left-wing politics. If Elizabeth Warren's campaign is any indication, doesn't have a huge constituency out there, but can play an important spoiler effect. So I don't think that means that we should view Elizabeth Warren as sort of like an enemy on the level of a Donald Trump or something who we have to crush. But certainly that dynamic is there of liberals like her popping up to try to occupy some of the space that is currently being occupied by socialists and potentially undercutting the socialist project going forward.
Yep, and didn't even end up, from what we see now at least, in the cabinet. So a little bit unfortunate there.
What was it for? What was it all for?
A lot of people saying that. And it is definitely a big thing now that we see this cabinet unfolding with people like Neera Tanden and possibly Rahm Emanuel. It does definitely raise a lot of questions about what types of resistance that people in the kind of the Bernie Sanders left wing of the party should take, and what because it can kind of feel tough. Like, what are you going to do to stop it? They're already in the power, in the seat of power in government. Joe Biden is. So what is the best tack forward for left wingers to take?
Say the tack on like how to fight.
Yeah, how to be how to be effective in the Biden years.
I think that people shouldn't have any illusion about what they are up against in the Biden years. The people like me, socialists, are not the left wing of the Biden coalition. Biden doesn't see us as one constituency that he has to make happy.